impacted several countries, but most of all, the most industrialized ones, which is very interesting to see. And regarding the topic on the conference, at the European level, the impact has been huge. It has been a social impact, it's a spatial impact as well, an economic impact, a lot of changes of habits. Probably we'll never come back to a lot of previous habits, and the spatial and territorial effects of the pandemics have to be carefully addressed, and it's not the case everywhere, of course. In this pandemic, the various types of proximities really take a big place, a huge place at the heart of the drama in different relations. From, on the one hand, COVID challenges the various types of proximities, but also they are at the heart of the changes, and this proximity, I will tell about that, will become now and are becoming more dangerous, more distant at the heart of our social and economic life. But let me start with a few spatial evidences as an introduction to the conference, a few spatial evidences about the impact of COVID. So the first thing we see, that's the map of yesterday of the number of COVID notification rate at the worldwide level, and it's quite obvious that most of the most developed countries are really impacted, and much more than the other types of countries. This is very interesting, and if we look at Europe, it's very we have to be very aware that Europe has really been severely hit by this pandemic. So if we have a look, that's also the record of yesterday of the number of deaths in the European countries. It is obvious that there are a lot of deaths in these countries, but really important spatial differences. So a few countries, especially countries from the northern part of Europe, really suffered from a very small number of cases, like in Iceland, Norway, or Denmark, for example, but even in Greece, even if it's changing now. And on the other hand, a few other countries, and mainly the most populated countries of Europe, still suffer from a lot of cases, like in the UK, France, Italy, Spain, for example, or Belgium also. So that's very interesting to see that. And here I have put also a map, an animated map of the diffusion of the fatalities related to COVID-19 across Europe. This was during the first wave, and it's pretty interesting to see that there are different modes of diffusion. So COVID starts somewhere and then it diffuses. That's really a diffusion pandemic, and it diffuses between large cities, through the neighborhood, and also along transport routes. And I will come back to see afterwards, because in order to emphasize the spatial dimension of this pandemic. One thing is clear, is that now we are in the second wave. Really, we are in the second wave. These are the most recent records this night. And you see that, for example, be there European Union, be there Russia, be there France, UK, even Germany, everybody is in the second wave, depending on the different types of countries, but it's not, we are really there now. And it is the case for all the countries. Here are some records coming from the European countries, and we can see that everybody is in the second wave. Although there are some differences. If you know, for example, for Sweden, it's not clear at all that there is a second wave now. For France or for Russia, it's pretty obvious. So it depends on the places, but mostly everybody is running into the second wave nowadays. So that's the first, were very broad impressions about the COVID. Now let me come to another part of my presentation, which is about the uneven spatial, regional, and territorial impacts, just in order to assess that the COVID has really differentiated impact, and it's really important for, and it's really interesting for regional scientists, for spatial economists, for geographers to assess about these changes, which are quite important. One very interesting fact about that is the sudden reintroduction of national frontiers. Here I've took the picture about the Schengen space. It was a place where you could really move without any problem inside the European Union, and then suddenly those borders closed, and very, very quickly. So all the countries, and mostly all the countries, were able to stop the circulation of people and partly of the goods, and there was a sudden resurgence of these borders control between the EU member states, not to say about the relation between Europe and the other countries as well, which are almost finished at that time. So that's very interesting to see that. And it's also, and another very interesting fact is the uneven development of the pandemic. Because here we say, let me just state this map of France. We see that in France, during the first wave, the impact regarding the regions has been very, very different. So some regions like the Île-de-France regions or Alsace were very, very impacted by a huge number of cases of COVID, and in other regions, especially in Brittany, for example, no cases at all. So that's really interesting to see this difference. And if we look at the map of the regions of Europe in NUTS 3, you can see that also the expected impacts of the COVID can be really different regarding the different types of countries, be there regarding the relation with industry, tourism, and so on. And so the economic content of this impact now is becoming very, very important. And how does COVID spread? You know, the first spread in February, March was between the big cities and was between the major metropoles. So this was the first way of diffusion of the COVID, and it was between the big cities, the metropoles. So that's the reason why during the first waves, most of the cases were located in the big cities. It's quite different now during the second waves because there is a diffusion process, there is a spread, and now the pandemic is spreading everywhere. So the big cities are still hit, sometimes a bit less, but the diffusion now is everywhere. But the first step was between the cities. So in the end, and I will come back to this now, there are a lot of spatial inequalities in front of this pandemic. First, because there are differences between nations, regions, different types of territories, and it can be related to various cases. For example, geographical peculiarities, the different groups of region, of nation, they are closed together and they diffuse between them. Also, there are strong connections between the infected areas. Also, some countries were able to put very strong or sometimes violent isolation measures or to close the border, like Austria or New Zealand, which have closed their borders at least until 2022. And also in several places, there were very strong and authoritarian lockdown, like in China, where people were locked in their houses and closed from the outside, or also like in Singapore, the very authoritarian organization of COVID traceability, which has allowed to stop the pandemic because everybody was obliged to be traced. And then when somebody was trapped with the COVID, they were obliged to stay at home or in a place apart from everybody. So it depends a lot. This pandemic appears to be depending a lot from the level of organizational capacities of the state and also of the authoritarian type of organization. And of course, there are huge differences in terms of density, and I will come to that afterwards because urban agglomeration have been more hit than peripheral or rural ones. So it's really clear that nowadays, the impact is very huge on tourism activity. And that's the reason why the countries which have devoted a large part of their activities, or the region, or the cities which have devoted a large part of their activities to tourism, are really impacted more than the other one. That is true for these places, of course. It's true, of course, for the transport societies or the airline companies. That's true for the cruise ships and related activity. Now, thousands of ships have been directed to Turkey or to Bangladesh in order to be destroyed or to be reshaped. And that's very interesting to see in this small matrix that the tourism and travel activity are, of course, the more heated one. And of course, pharmacy and Meditech really beneficiate from this pandemic, of course. So once again, about the tourism, and it's pretty clear that the countries in the EU, for example, the countries where the tourism activity is huge are really under the threat of a great and very, very big regression, because probably we will not come back to the same situation recently. Just to finish on that point, that's only to show you that at the level of the cities, every big cities have been impacted by the impact of the COVID. These are some maps about the excess of deaths during the first wave of COVID. We can see that even Stockholm in Sweden, all those cities, they have been hugely impacted by the COVID. It's completely different regarding the other areas, because these cities have been so affected that in some places there have been a kind of urban exodus, or a kind of urban-rural migration. So some people, I know it was the case in my place in Paris, about 1 million people moved from Paris to join their secondary houses or peripheral areas or places they rent in the outskirts, just in order to avoid the danger to be together in the same place in a very, very crowded and dangerous area regarding the spread of the pandemic. And here we come to the proximity. Also, a very interesting case is also the rise of the return of local food. So a lot of people turn to those local foods. There were big queues in front of the local food or the bio stores and so on. But it has to be, we have really to be aware that maybe this change, which is really in favor of the agriculture near the cities, of the urban agriculture, maybe this change is reserved for the most rich people. But in any sense, it asks one very, very important question for the future, which is how to feed the cities, regarding the fact that nowadays more than 50% of the world population is living in cities, and it raised to a huge number of 70 to 80% in several European countries. So we really have to put this question on the agenda for the future. And also, one question which is very interesting regarding this question of cities and urban areas is what I call the revenge of peri-urban areas. So peri-urban areas have been very, very, very much attacked, because there are places where which force people to connect a lot, to commute for very long distance. They consume a lot of land, a lot of soils, they pollute a lot, and it's not, in terms of environment, they are not virtuous in any sense. So they have been really attacked regarding that, and there were a lot of policies trying to reconcentrate people in the heart of the city. But no, with regard to the pandemic, a lot of people want to go or to come back to the peri-urban areas, because on the one hand they are less dangerous, on the other hand they are quite safe. It's also possible to have access to nature on a daily basis, and this is very important during a lockdown, for example. And also, And also it had to be said that regarding the development of the telework, it's more or less possible to stay in those places, even if you have to go only 2 days or 3 days per week to your office. So you can suffer for the idea to have a long commuting because you spend the most time of the week in your house in peri-urban areas. So that's very important. And also there is the rise with this pandemic of a lot of social and spatial inequalities. So it's really obvious, and there are a lot of studies on that nowadays, which show that people living in crowded apartments have been very, very heated by this pandemic. The number of square meters is very important. And also that's the question of the sanitary conditions, the number of people who are living in a place. Also the access to different type of possibility in your own apartment or around. Do you have access to a private garden, like in peri-urban area? Do you have access to a forest, to a park? It really changed a lot of things. So regarding you are living in a very small apartment in a very crowded area, or if you're living in a big houses with a large garden in the peri-urban or rural area, the conditions are totally different, and you are completely impacted in a very different way regarding your well-being, regarding your happiness in front of the pandemic. So this pandemic introduces a very, very social and spatial inequality between different types of people, and especially between white collar and blue collar. So white collar, like probably you and myself, can telework at a distance. They can stay at home. Sometimes they are quite large places to work at home. They are equipped to do that, so they can do it. This regarding blue collar, that's completely different. They are obliged to go to their work on a daily basis. They are exposed to the infection in crowded places or in crowded transport areas. And there is a very interesting and very dangerous separation. We have really to cope with this. And of course, that's a question of well-being, that's a question of mental health. So even if you are in good condition, at home, but you are alone, the isolation at home, the social distancing by the mask, the loss of contact with your family, of your relatives can impact you severely. And now there are a lot of reports about severe mental disease, especially during the second wave, because people now are more and more affected by the fact that they cannot see other people, they cannot meet them, they cannot look at them, they cannot touch them, and so on, and so on. So that's very interesting, and I browsed this idea, this broad content in order to come to proximity. I wanted to show you that the spatial dimensions of the COVID are very, very, very important. Now I want to come to the proximity and to show you that the proximities are really at stake. So that's various types of proximity are at stake. They are at the very core. On the one hand, there are two things. On the one hand, the proximities at the very core of the profound changes which are overcoming now. And on the other hand, their profound nature is affected by the pandemic as well. So that's very interesting to see both. So not only the art, but also they are changing regarding the pandemic. Let's start with geographical proximity. So geographical proximity usually is sought for when it is associated with the need for contact and interaction, which means organized proximity. For example, in a cluster, you have geographical proximity and organized proximity. Altogether, they give the success of a successful cluster. That's the idea. That's also the same with within the cities, with the organization of the cities. So I just published a paper with Lisbourg de Lepage on a recent book by Glaser and Nijkamp and Courtit on the urban empire on this topic. And in this we show that the existence of the cities, of the urban agglomeration, is explained by the search for geographical proximity. So usually, geographical proximity was sought for. But with the pandemic, there is a total reversal of the relation with proximity. The causality is reversed. Now we have a kind of unwanted geographical proximity because people try to avoid too many contacts. They avoid to see friends or relatives. So more or less, geographical proximity is becoming dangerous nowadays. This is really a crucial point. Of course, the public authorities have imposed different types of barriers, like, for example, masks, lockdown, physical distances, and this is the case of a social distance. The term social distance is really well employed. It's because it has not only a physical content, because you have to avoid to be together, you have to take your distance, but on the other hand, it has a very strong social content because of social rules, because of social habits, because of institutional rules imposed by the authorities as well. There are a few methods. They are very simple methods. They came from the Middle Age, but they have been established more than 100 years ago by Dr. Mark Starloff during the great influenza pandemic. And all this position of these social distance measures, their goal is to reduce the negative effects of geographical proximity and in order to start a possible vaccine. Of course, too much geographical proximity can really be a problem today because of the possibility of infection, of course, but also of the quality of the relation and well-being, because it depends, as I stated before, on the fact, for example, that you are living in individual houses or small or large apartments, and you're exposed to the danger, more or less exposed to the dangers of geographical proximity. Of course, there are also a lot of density variables, even in your room, number of square meters, number of rooms, do you have a big or small family, are you living alone or not, you have a garden, you have a terrace, all those kind of things, they become really important nowadays. And of course, it's not only at home, but there are also the question of the offices. Now, the offices are becoming very dangerous places. So in the past year, there was the development of a lot of forms of meeting together people, like open spaces in the offices, like third places when you put people coming from the job market, and also people for leisure, co-working places with intelligent innovators working together and so on. There were a lot of places in order to try to help people to interact. No, those places are becoming very, very, very dangerous. So they are totally abandoned. And regarding the open spaces, it's pretty obvious that it will be very difficult to come back to the previous situation. So there are a lot of rooms now, a lot of flats which are sold by the big companies because they destroyed their open spaces places in order to try to mitigate between inside and teleworking. So that's very, very interesting to see that offices are one of the main places of the spread of the virus, with a restaurant, sport facilities, and so on. And this is an explanation also of the huge importance of the economic crisis, of course. So one very interesting case is now the rise of what we call distant proximities. A very good example is the boom of Zoom. Nowadays, we are on Zoom. Quite every day, we do things on Zoom or other types of communication tools as well. That's the rise also of teleworking. I don't know how it is on your place, but for example, on my sake, I'm completely on teleworking, and in France, the government imposed at least 2 or 3 days per teleworking for everybody in every private or public organization. So it's really huge to see that. So this rise, that's also the rise of the COVID information apps. And on the other hand, we see that there is a huge slump of meeting, for example, academic meetings, and also trade fairs. But even family and social relations have really diminished, they have really reduced, and a part of this social and family relation, they are now being done at a distance via Zoom or Skype or other ways. Is that possible for everybody? Is that possible for everybody? It is obvious that it's not, of course, it's not possible for everybody to do that. And it's not possible to do that for every type of work. And I was stating before on the huge divide between blue collar and white collar. Of course, there's a big part of the exchanges, a big part of the work, of the jobs, which cannot be done at a distance, which requires still to be there, even in material, even at least in material terms. But we see that there is a big rise of this distant proximity. Just to give you a small example, for example, Amazon, the market capitalization of Amazon has inflated by more than 500 billion euros during the pandemic. That's become the richest firm in the world. That's also the case for Amazon, for Microsoft, for Netflix, for Apple, for example. A lot of firms like that are really taking gains of this pandemic. There's also a kind of shift. It looks like we are accelerating the shift toward the numerical society in the end. But is it sustainable? It's difficult to know. It's difficult to know that, because you see here is the drop in the Zoom action 1 week ago, the day of the announcement of the Pfizer vaccine. That's the drop in the Nasdaq auction. It's very interesting to see that these days everybody is looking at the possibility. Is it possible to replace the geographical proximity by the organized proximity at a distance? Is it possible to replace everything and to do everything at a distance? It's really difficult to say that, but we have we have a lot of literature around that. It's literature regarding geographical and organized proximity on the one hand, and that's also the case of the so-called proxemics. Proxemics, a kind of an ancestor of the proximity analysis. It has been stated by Edward T. Hall in the 60s that each person is surrounded by a surface, a kind of bubble that constitutes an emotionally strong zone or individual security perimeter. And he states there are different types of proximity. So that intimate distance, that's one of love, to embrace, to touch, the personal distance, the social distance, the public distance. And in every societies, you have those, it is claimed that you have, it is claimed by the anthropologist, that you have these different types of bubbles, of types of surfaces. And of course, you exchange are very different regarding those type of distance. So you need everybody, every human being needs geographical proximity. Every human being needs organized proximity. We need contact. It's impossible to survive without having to survive a long time, especially not only in physical terms, but regarding mental health. It's impossible to survive a long time without having those type of contacts. And It is not reserved only to human beings, because we are animals, we are human, we are social animals as well, and all the animals has those distance and all have those kind of relation. So I took here the example of bats because they were very praised at the start of the pandemic, but even it is even true from the trees, where there is the so-called crown shyness, the relation between big trees in the at the top of the trees. So that's very interesting to see that. I don't want to enter too much into those discussion now. It was just to give you a flavor of that and to relate to the main proximity approaches. So let me go to my conclusion. Of course, they are very, very provisory. So first conclusion, it means that geographical proximity matters, yes. Even in the era of a so-called death of distance, thanks to Alexander, thanks to social networks, geographical proximity really matters. But even if it matters, it can become very, very dangerous. Nowadays, it is mostly unwelcome. So we'll see in the future when we will have the vaccine, if they are good, if we will be allowed to come back to normal situation, but we'll see that. What is true is that, in my opinion, we'll never come back to the previous situation. We'll never come back to so-called normal situation, because part of the geographical proximity relation are replaced by organized proximity at a distance, because those proximity, they are less risky, and also because the virtual exchanges are expanding, because they help to gain a lot of money and a lot of exchange and a lot of time. So there will be big changes and big problems with some industries on the one hand, but on the other hand, a part of a geographical proximity will be replaced by organized proximity as well. But can we live? The only important question is, can we live in a remote society? Can a society live and function remotely? No, of course not. Of course not. It's impossible, because first, it will be my last statement. First, we need face-to-face relations for a part of job purposes. This means not today, not on the basis of day-to-day meetings. So we can use what is called the temporary geographical proximity. At different moment of times, sorry, we can meet. We don't need to be located in the same place all the time, but we need to join, we need to meet for the sake of our work. Otherwise, it's impossible for problems of mental card, from problem of trust, of cooperation. We need to meet people, to discuss with them, and to do things with them. On the other hand, it's pretty obvious that we need to see our family and friends. We cannot see only them on a screen. And it's very important for the sake of mental health. And also, the last thing, it's really important also to maintain the physical contact in order to avoid too huge separation between teleworkers on the one hand and the blue collars on the other hand. So that's really important to think about those things now, and to think about the proximity in the future, and also to come back with stories. So thanks very much for your attention. Do not hesitate to ask questions or to contact me.
Yeah, André.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your insightful presentation. Immediate reaction. Of course, this geographical proximity at risk, unevenness of penetration, of COVID penetration in the European space, and tendencies in decentralization inside the EU, it's a lot of similarities to the Russian case and to the Russian COVID realities. That's immediate reaction to your presentation. And I'm pleased to give the floor to the next plenary speaker, Nadezhda Zamyatina, with her unique talent to create new knowledge in the very familiar and very well studied topics. It's a real talent. So Nadezhda, please take the floor.
Thank you for maybe not the floor, but screen in the era of distant proximity. And of course, the presentation is on behalf of both of us with Alexander Pelyasov. And before speaking about the COVID, let's think a little bit about the methodological base of COVID studies. And first of all, let's see and try to think about the two ways of thinking about the space. As Manuel Castells distinguished in his well-known book, there are two kinds of space, the space of flows and the space of places. But the differences between these two ways of thinking about space is much deeper and fundamental, because when we deal with space of flows, we have to think about networks, routes of diffusion of innovations, for example, and diffusion from center and periphery. So we think about space very often in terms of center and periphery when we think it with a model of space of flows. And when we have the space as a space of places, we have to use just very other terms and very other tools. For example, we go into the black box of regional development, and we think about triple helix, for example, innovative milieu and institutional environment. So we think about mostly interior factors of development. Then when they think about, for example, city just as points when we deal with space of flows. So our presentation is an attempt to understand which model of space could give better results when studying COVID-19. We will speak about the Russian space in addition to the brilliant representation. And first of all, we divide the ways of thinking about Russian space, and we'll try to understand what is Russia of networks and what is Russia of places. Russia of networks is a very good known Russia of center and periphery, and the networks of cities and other parts of Russia. And when we think about Russia as Russia of places, we see Russia as a variety of places, a variety of different areas with different environment within them. And so we could recognize COVID in the first case as a process of bad innovation, as a process of spreading from point to point. And when we go to the Russia of places, we could recognize the differences between absorptive capacity of different areas. And it's, of course, we couldn't think one way without other. And when we have to understand all aspects of pandemic, we must use the both ways of thinking about place. But each way would give us different results. Let's start with Russia of networks and Russia of center of periphery. It's maybe the most traditional way of thinking about Russia, and it's works very often. For example, in the right, this funny screen from Facebook, which shows us the announcement in the city of Tambov, where the local authorities motivate their restrictions by the order of mayor of Moscow. Mayor of Moscow is nobody in the city of Tambov, but officially, but in fact he is somebody. So and it's very typical for Russia when regional authorities tends to copy the patterns of Moscow powers, and then, as we have seen in Andrei's presentation, of course, we could see that COVID goes from point to point as it is could be expected by the idea of center and periphery. It's very simple to understand that top regions of Russia covered by pandemic in spring during the first wave of pandemic are the same that the central cause of Russian space. For example, left table, I'm sorry for presenters from different countries for using Russian language here. But the idea is very simple. In green, there are marked regions which are included in all these tables. The left tables is more populated regions of Russia. In the middle, we have table which shows the regions with the most busy airports of Russia. And at the right part of our screen, we see top regions by the number of morbidity in May and then in summer. And of course, we see some just equalities between top populated regions, regions with high number of passengers moving through the airports, and the spread of COVID. But in summer, we could see some very strange regions. For example, Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug, Irkutsk region, Yamal-Nenets. They are too small to be in the top of pandemic. They are too small, and so we can think about some other ideas to explain this situation. And in summer, our media were filled by news from very small localities, which are close localities, even the shift settlements in oil fields. For example, the situation on Chayanda oil field in Siberia, in the Republic of Yakutia, was very actively discussed. Then Diveevsky Monastery. Then some cities with nuclear research centers. They're very small, and they have some status of zato with a restriction of entering into these cities for those who do not busy in these research centers. And so, of course, some scientists have the ideas that not only size but crowding is the factor of pandemic. But in fact, when we think about this factor, we see that, for example, not all shift regions are covered with a wave of pandemic. For example, Nenets autonomous okrug is just all covered with shift camps, and we can see at the map at the left side of our slide that it's really populated by shift workers, but the level of pandemic is lower than in the whole Russia. And we also have some shift regions, for example, like Chukchi autonomous okrug, where the level of pandemic is just now not very high. So we must think about some other factors of pandemic. And here we can have to take in mind some interior factors like institutions, environment, regimes, behavior practices, and so on. Not only center and periphery diffusion. We must think the variety of local situations in Russian regions. And here we also could find some very interesting features. One of our presentations today will be about the quality of life as a factor of pandemic. And it's a very interesting feature when they see that the quality of life on the left map is the rating of Russian regions by quality of life by RBK agency. And we see how many similarities between the rating of Russian regions by quality of life and the early stage of pandemic. The most rich and open for foreign travel regions were the first among those who meeting the COVID in Russia. And this is a very interesting case to think of. And what is especially interesting, that pandemic was a little bit changed the major way of thinking about Russian space, even in political field. We knew that the president of Russia just in April gave additional powers to governors and to make some restrictions, not in Moscow and not as on federal level, but what they want. And this is not just a revolutionary idea for Russian political field. And we could recognize it even as just unexpected federalization of Russia and rising the degree of decentralization. And we never could think about so high level, for example, of diversity in local legislature. Right map shows us the regions where the force majeure was where the COVID was thinked as force majeure by local legislature. They are highlighted in red, and it's just unbelievable degree of diversity of Russian space, because we usually think Russian space as just some clone or some copy of federal power and federal tools. And so I have a dream to have something good from the situation of pandemic, and I would like to hope that we will extract something positive after this situation, and especially something positive for the structure of Russian space. And we would like to dream that it will be some federalization of real federalization, not only by legislature, but in fact, how could it work? We know from the book of Norwegian economist Erik Reinert that sometimes isolation of economic system on some stages of the development is good, because such an such isolation could work as a greenhouse to help a weak economics to grow. And so such just a spontaneous federalization of Russia could work as a greenhouse for real federalization, and it could help to grow for weak institution, for weak diversity of institution of Russian regions. And we have seen some examples of this diversification when, for example, the mayor of the city of Sayansk do not enter the example of Moscow and lockdown, and he stay opened some businesses in his city. And so I would like to finish with a dream that pandemic is a strange situation and a very bad situation for health, for economic, but it also could bring us some positive changes, and especially in the structure of Russian space, and it could make it a little bit more diverse than it is, and of course be healthy in this hard period. Good luck.
Thank you, Nadezhda, for your insightful presentation. At least two themes for next papers we can extract from your presentation. First, it's about unexpected positive externalities of the COVID-19 pandemics for the Russian space. That's interesting topic, interesting theme for future papers. I invite the audience to take this chance. And the second, of course, very interesting term, newly invented during this presentation, about spontaneous federalization in the Russia. So it's interesting also to elaborate further this idea in the next papers. And I'm happy to go next to our first session about Russian regions and COVID-19, and to give the floor or the screen, whatever, to our speaker, which is from the new young generation of the Russian regional scholars, economic geographers and regional economists. And maybe the best of best these two authors are in this new young generation of the Russian scholars. Please, you are welcome.
Yes, hello everybody, and if you can hear me well, I may start. It's a great honor for us to present our small research in such a profound meeting. First of all, I want to say that this is the co-authored research of myself, Ruslan Dokhov, from Moscow State University, Moscow, and High School of Economics, Russia, and of my co-author, Mikhail Topnikov, who is also from Lomonosov Moscow State University. And our present research is not about the dynamics of the pandemic, so the epidemic itself, but it's focused on the dynamics of the population mobility during these pandemic times in Russia, especially in the mirror or via the lens of the effectiveness of self-isolation measures that were established by the Russian government during the spring and early summer this year. So let me start with some like extended preview, which is about the human mobility itself and the human mobility as a key for stopping the virus. As was shown in the recent paper by Espinosa, Castillo, Chavez, and Perrings, the various governments established various regimes of restriction of mobility during these pandemics, and different regimes appeared to have different efficiency on the actual mobility of the population. They provided in this paper that is shown on the screen, they provided some typologization of the different mobility restriction regimes, from partial restrictions on non-commercial cross-border traffic to heavily politicized stay-at-home orders. And usually the governments are going from the lower types of restriction to the higher types, from the non-politicized stay-at-home orders to heavily politicized. And the heavy restrictions usually impose not only higher efficiency in terms of population mobility, but also the higher economic costs on the communities that are affected by these mobility restrictions. What we also need to say is that the COVID-19 is in the whole world is overwhelmingly addressed as an area-specific risk. So usually the measures, the regimes that are established by local authorities or the state authorities are differentiated within the territory of the state. Either it is federal or it is an uniform state. On the right map, we can see the stages of abolishing the self-isolation in the regions of Russia in the summer of this year. And we can see that even in such an even country in terms of its institution as Russia is today, we can see the huge differentiation in the types of abolishing of the lockdown. But let's move forward to our research. We tried to measure how efficient was the lockdown in different areas of Russia via the lens of the wages of the local population. We used two main data sources. The main data source for mobility was the Yandex Mobility Monitor, which is actually the online map, which can be parsed via special. And it shows the daily scores for the mobility in 308 municipalities in Russia, which actually are about 13% of all municipalities in Russia. The data is usually shown as is shown on the card on the screen. For the town, we know the average score before the pandemic, we know the actual score for the day, and we know the dynamics for the previous days from the beginning of February. So from the days that are before the first lockdowns that were established in some regions, in some Russian regions. And the additional data source was the ordinary statistics, which was provided by Rosstat, Russian Statistical Bureau, which is about wages on the municipal level of detaility, of the granularity. So all this wages data was adjusted to the cost of living by us because Russia is a very big country and 1,000 rubles in Moscow is not 1,000 rubles in Dagestan or in Chukchi Autonomous District. Then we divided all the municipalities of Russia in 10 deciles by the average level of wages in this municipality. And then we analyzed the dynamics for these deciles of the municipalities by wage group. What we can see is an enormous polarization during the time of the pandemics. On the right part of the graphics that is shown in the right part of the screen, you can see that before the pandemics, all the curves are almost one same to another. We can see that there are some sharp drops in the first part of the graphics that are the national holidays. So on these sharp drops, we can see the ordinary effects of some kind of self-isolation, like self-isolation of people during the holidays of February 23rd and March 8th. But then, after the president's appeal that the country is going into the times of pandemics and we are going to establish some kind of restrictions, the restrictions were first of all established in some regions, in the most like dangerous regions of Russia those times, and then the national lockdown started. And what we can see that the introduction of the national lockdown led to immediate and sharp mobility drops in all groups. And these immediate and sharp drops took place almost for a week. But then Russian president appeared to extend the lockdown not for a week, but for a month, and then for another month. But the Russian government, the Russian authorities did not allocate appropriate resources to finance the population, the people, and the businesses for their losses due to this lockdown. So the people were left to like live in their own ways, and they decided not to follow this lockdown as strong as they did it on the first week of the lockdown. What is also interesting is the inverse ratio of reduction rate compared to the national holidays. We can see in the first part of the graph that the poorer are the territory, the lower is the drop in the mobility during the ordinary holiday. But what we can see in the lockdown times are that the richer is the territory, the higher are the drops in the lockdown, and the poor territories cannot afford themselves to isolate so heavily as it was for the rich territories. And also we can see the dramatic decline of the effectiveness of self-isolation after its two extensions. What is also interesting on this graphic is this anomaly in the right part of the graph for the most poor decile, the most poor group of Russian territories, which is because of its geographical position. A lot of these areas are located in the Muslim ethnic republics of Northern Caucasus, and they celebrated the Muslim holidays, of course, and one of the biggest of them is Eid al-Fitr, which was in the late May this year, and this is the because of what this anomaly have happened. If we aggregate these 10 deciles in 3 groups, we can see that they actually show the very different types of reaction on the coronavirus lockdown. The poor deciles show the almost U-shaped curve that was not deep. The restriction was not very effective for them, and it was very, very long. This is mostly because on these poor areas, a lot of people are working in the governmental sector, which was much more resilient for these lockdowns, and the government tried to finance and to keep wages of the workers that are directly employed in the governmental sector. But in the middle and in the rich areas, we see almost V-shaped curve and of the mobility. That was sharp drop and then more or less quick like restriction, and the mobility went higher than it was during the first week of the pandemics. Let's now take a look on the geography of this uneven reaction of Russian municipalities to the lockdown. We can see that on the right map, the municipalities are drawn with the same color that is used on the left on the graphic that was shown also before. We can see that that Russia is, we know that it is a very highly polarized country in terms of wages, and this high polarization became even higher during the times of the pandemics in terms of mobility. So we can say that that the best that the worst in terms of the self-isolations were the poor, and this is the map that shows only 3 poorest deciles on the Russian map, and they are mostly allocated in so-called inner periphery of the central Russia areas, which are the mostly rural or small town areas near the borders of Russian regions, or on the western border, which is heavily depopulated in recent years. The other areas of the poorest and the less less effective of the coronavirus lockdown areas are located in the ethnic republics of Northern Caucasus and the ethnic republics of Siberia. If we move to the richest group, the 3 richest deciles, they are very heavily located in the agglomeration, the areas of the biggest Russian cities. Also in the northern parts, with very, very low population density and that are dependent on the resource rent extraction areas. And also in some growth points, like in Tatarstan Republic, in some of the new gas fields near the Caspian Sea, and in some other places. And the middle are all others, are actually like middle Russian areas in the center and southwest of the country, and their type of reaction was very same to the rich, but with lower, but less effective and less quick in the last weeks of the coronavirus lockdown. If we'll try to compare the effects that we had in Russia on the mobility and the effects that were, for example, in the United States that were calculated by the Economist Journal, we can see that the authors of the Economist articles say that there was a very sharp decline of mobility in the United States and that the polarization went very high. But if we'll compare this to Russia, we'll see that the ratio, the level of polarization in Russia was much, much higher, and this difference between the lowest and the highest are much, much higher than in the United States. So let me come to the conclusions. The introduction of the lockdown in Russia really had the immediate impact on the mobility of all types of territories, but its extension without sufficient economic support dramatically reduced its efficiency. The self-isolation exacerbated spatial inequality in Russia. Poor territories had half lower rates of self-isolation, and the exit of the lockdown was much slower for them. And the most vulnerable in sense of impossibility of effectively reducing the mobility were the small town areas and rural areas in central Russia, rural areas in southern Siberia, and the national republics of the northern Caucasus. And in the very last slide of my presentation, I'm happy to announce that this research was published just yesterday in Environment and Planning A, and feel free to read and cite it in your own works. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer the questions.
Thank you, Ruslan. and it's a great news because environment and planning A is a very interesting and multifaceted and comprehensive in scientific themes journal. So congratulations and thank you for your presentation. We have some time limitations, and so my invitation is to give your questions in the chat, and then maybe just directly the author can answer the questions, or during the discussion time, which we'll have today at the end of our session. Thanks again. And now we are going to the next presenter, to Andrey Treivish, who is a very talented scientist with unique sense of Russian space. So please take the scheme or take the floor, whatever.
Hello, dear colleagues. Our presentation is mostly in Russian, but I'll try to give some comments in English. You see the topic, and you see three starting initial points. The first one is that Russia is the world dacha leader, with its 17 to 20 million dacha houses and plots, and 50 to 60 million dachniks, potential dwellers of these houses and plots, which constitute about 1/5 of the total world number. Due to different various reasons, from severe climate to very small urban apartments. Here you see very raw evaluation of distribution of the number of potential dacha or second home dwellers by world regions. Не работает. Ну, анимация не работает, потому что не запущена полная.
Андрей Ильич, там вот справа есть кнопочка, вот справа внизу такая похожая на... Да-да-да, вот да-да-да, вот это. Не, правее, еще правее. Правее, еще правее. Вот которая похожа на...
Спасибо. Two other points, more important for this topic. The second is that our second home life is very close to the Western style sub and counter urbanization, but it's temporal and it accelerates the rhythmic pulsations of our habitable space. The third is that dacha is a multifunctional dwelling. Its role of a refuge from wars or sicknesses and so on was always among the reasons for renting or purchasing a dacha, a second home. But it looked very marginal and even funny at the background of other more important reasons. In spring, this spring, the COVID pandemic made it much more real. As for dachniks, they regard the dacha the best place for self-isolation, then the better one than the city. As for the authorities, the urban authorities support their escape from cities, while in the places who obtain this inflow of dachniks, it is very different. we'll discuss mostly these two points. And the key questions are as follows. Is Russian dacha really the best place for an escape from the pandemic? And if that, does it depend on geographical proximity from the large city? And is there any positive external effect during the pandemic and after this virus? Dacha is the most mass type of the concentration of population in Russia. This is definitely the so-called positive external effect, externality, because resettling migration accelerate very high polarization of Russian social space, while dachas, at least in summer, they soften this polarization. As you can see here, migrations are augmenting population in large cities and their environments, agglomerations, and somewhere else. Here you see dachniks are widespread. Their share of dacha households among all households in rural peripheries is relatively high all over the northern non-Chernozem Russia. The housing market reacted very soon to the pandemic and during the first wave. And here you can see that renting, ordinary renting of mostly urban living spaces and other spaces, lofts and so on, has declined. While the rent of exurban housing has grew 2.5 times, and purchasing of the second exurban dwelling grew up to. Moscow Oblast is the Russian dacha leader, of course. Before pandemic, it was a great pulsation both in Moscow city, where the summer weekend day view about 9 million people instead of 12 in Moscow city boundaries within it. While the Moscow Oblast was full of dachniks and elevated its population in that summer weekend day by a factor of 3 million more. According to Sian, this is the most popular information center for capital city and region real estate. The number of those who want to build a house in sub-Moscow area grew up by a factor of 2.5. As you can see, the spread of virus in Moscow region was depending on physical proximity to Moscow. And what was the price? In close suburbs, it was over about 12 million rubles for a dacha. In mid-zone, which was most popular, because over one half of suggestions and asks for dachas was in the middle zone. The price was a little bit more modest. The reaction was very notable. The market reacted very soon after the COVID wave began. You can see that the peak was in May and early June, then it fell down. And the ex-urban dwelling was regarded as a basic one by 56% of clients. Among them, 37% want to live there permanently, and the others to visit it more or less regularly. What is the potential to buy a dacha in Moscow Oblast? You see that when you sell an apartment, a two-room apartment in a standard night area in Moscow, it would be equal to 92% of a cottage in a close Moscow suburb. It would be a cottage and plus a car in the mid-zone, and even two cottages in far near the external boundaries of Moscow Oblast. While when you sell a flat in a city of Moscow Oblast proper, it would be not enough for a cottage in the same municipality of the oblast. Here you can see that the most expensive dachas are in the southwestern sector, and it is noted that Muscovites look for a dacha somewhere in the same sector. The same when they live, for instance, in the northeast sector of Moscow, northeast administrative district, they would look for the northeastern direction for a dacha. Outside Moscow Oblast, as you can see, about 140 kilometers is a breakdown when Dachniks are more numerous than the local permanent rural population. And further, they also are more or less equal as well. Here you can see the average summer density of Dachniks by municipalities only in organized forms of dachas, in garden plots and cottage settlements, excluding those individual houses in rural settlements and inside cities, because this is the aerospace source. There is a great difference of the possibilities of garden and dacha plots to accept the dwellers for all year round, because they differ greatly in terms of communal facilities. As you can see, for instance, the magistral natural gas is available for garden and dacha plots only inside cities like Korolov, Pereslavl-Zalesky, Yaroslavl, and so on. Here is an interval in Western Kostroma Oblast where there are no garden plots at all. Even the possibility to use internet with the 3G standard, at least, which is not enough to work distantly. is also quite different. It's good in cities, but here it's this interval, this portion of space along this axis show you that it's very low communicative ability. And we selected 3 points for 3 local cases to study. The first one is Pereslavl rayon in Yaroslavl Oblast, but it's actually a remote suburban zone. As you can see here, this is very raw estimate. In summer, Dachniks constitute some 70% of local population. In this November, about 20%. Gas, 30% of settlements, and only 17% of villages. And even this figure is overestimation because houses are quite another story. You can have a tube near village, but you cannot have it in your house. You may pay millions for this. So only 10 to 15% of rural houses have gas, and the same with water and other facilities. The second case is a very special village of Novodashkova at the boundary of Yaroslavl and Kostroma oblasts. In fact, only 250 kilometers from Moscow, but only 50 from Yaroslavl. This is a combination of 2 types of dacha areas. A remote one for Moscow, but with features of suburban type as well, because it's located at the Volga River, and Volga is a very powerful attraction for Dachniks. You can see here that conditions are, well, somewhat average for Russian dacha areas. And the third case is Ugory in the heart of Kostroma Oblast, far inner periphery, as you can see. Dachniks constitute about 1/2 of local population in summer, but if in summer it was, Dachniks are make about 1/2 of house owners here, but they constitute only 20% in August of the population, and about some 5%, not more, in late autumn. And there are the worst living conditions there. Even no bus, even 5 to 7 kilometers from the nearest food store, and the roads may be like this. So, conclusions. This year showed that dacha can be a refuge from stresses and diminish the social and other tensions, and it may overgrow into real Western-style suburbanization and counter-urbanization for the residents of large cities. But many things depend on physical distance and proximity in this geographical sense, and of the equipment of the territory. At the background of pandemic, Moscow area is most popular, and the dacha counter-urbanization has been growing into residential, permanent residential for relatively long. And COVID pandemic accelerated this process. Further, the preconditions for this deurbanization are worst in technical aspect, in terms of infrastructure, while the dachas are more available economically. They are cheaper. Local authorities do not want to support, of course, the mobile urban population, which is important at least to preserve the settlement network in far peripheries. Bad roads and the lack in the very heart of Russia of natural gas and water supply and compression of social sphere, shrinkage of the sphere during the unification of settlements, their enlargement, make the inflow of Dachniks less stable. So Russia is a giant country, and many things depend on where do you live and where do you want to spend these COVID lockdowns. Thank you for attention. Well, a joke from an internet. Thank you. Thank you for your questions in chat.
Okay. Thank you, Andrei, for collective presentation, which you have presented. 3 points, yes, at least we can taken from your presentation. COVID does accelerate the process, natural process, which has already been in place before, but it does accelerate this process. Nadezhda has told us about new process of spontaneous decentralization inside the Russian Federation, etc. But you have told about the acceleration of the previously started processes. The second about self-organization in human special behavior, self-organization as reaction to the crisis. And the third, it's my personal comment after the first presentations from Ruslan and from you. It looks like we're now in the laboratory of methods how to study COVID-19 in Russia, because both of you have elaborated different methods and methodology how to touch this event, this phenomenon from different angles. Thank you both. And as for questions for the chat and for the section with discussion. And now we are going to our St. Petersburg colleagues with their presentation on the retail sector and its reaction to the COVID-19 pandemics. So please, our colleagues from St. Petersburg, take the floor. We're happy to see you and your presentation.
Thank you, dear colleagues, for this possibility to present our still ongoing research. And these are only the first results that we can present so far, which is even more valuable for us and makes us possibility to hear the online comments on what we are doing now with our team. And now, by our topic, we are moving from top down to the very local scale of investigation. From the global one, we are going down, as I understand, and now we are in the very bottom of the scale, of the geographical scale. This is the impact of a pandemic on the urban street retail development in a Russian metropolis that we studied with our team from St. Petersburg State University. So, sorry. Okay, works. So what was lockdown in St. Petersburg, which will be in the primary focus of our attention here? So like elsewhere, probably, or most elsewhere of March, all offline retail trade and services facilities, except food, vital goods trade, and critical social services were closed for customers' visits. And since June and up to now, it steadily was reopening, and retail facilities which applied sanitary restrictions were able to work offline. So how it reflected, everything reflected on the branch on this industry. For retail trade, figures are not so frightening. During first 9 months of the year, the drop in the turnover for retail trade was only minus 4.2%, although some other retail branches in services, for example, like public catering, experienced the dramatic drop of more than 30% of turnover, and in some months, like in May, even 65%. And what we can see from the figures here, the turnover during last 2 months, in August and September, was restoring, and it kept growing from month to month. And a few more trends were registered by observers so far. Landslide growth of online trade turnover. It keeps going even after lockdown is over. So probably this was a trigger point that this new branch of retail to make it widely spread. The second is that in the city center of 2 Russian metropolises like Moscow and St. Petersburg keeps growing after lockdown is over. So they're shutting down even nowadays in the city center. But some researchers claim that in the socialist time, large housing estates, so-called microrayon areas, the residential sleeping communities of socialist time, street retail was affected less dramatically than that in the city center. So main assumption that we make is that if the last statement is true, this means that different functional morphological zones of a metropolis were affected by the pandemic in a different way. So our ambition is to verify this simple assumption. The main indicator that we apply here is the share of vacant space in street retail. And here we use not our, but the Coolers International observations. And according to them, 5 main central streets of St. Petersburg in September showed 14.4% of vacant or closed locations in the city center. And which is much more important for us is that during the last quarter, when, as you remember, the turnover of retail was going up, the vacant space went up in the city center too. So the locations kept closing in the city center during last months. And maximum value of the maximum share of vacant space was registered in one of the most central streets in St. Petersburg. It was 18% in September. In Moscow, Coolers International measures not 5 but 90 main streets of Moscow, which goes beyond the very city center. And this is why the figure here is probably 8.4, but this figure is much higher than that in 2019, for example. But the maximum values of share of vacant space, which was registered in the very central streets, is comparable to that in St. Petersburg, and it's reported as 17%. Now we're moving to the micro rayons, to the socialist time residential areas, which we need to compare with those figures of the city center. So first, what are these micro rayons? Up to 80 to 90% of population in Russian cities in the whole live there now. They occupy up to 70% of their area, and they're still growing. I mean, this morphology still keeps growing in Russian cities. All of them were built as completely monofunctional by their projects, by their idea, and they were built to spend the night. And you can see the building like this. What about now? First of all, in the 90s, the mobile trade facilities like this appeared in the areas. By the beginning of 2000s, as probably elsewhere as well, the big trade formats like chain hypermarkets and malls appeared there as well. And the latest trend, which lasts for last 10 probably years or so, is that retail intrudes into the the completely residential buildings of the socialist time, cutting out the doors instead of the former windows, making new entrances and new commercial spaces in the ground floors. It happens not only in central cities, but elsewhere. These are examples from small cities as well. The city of St. Petersburg presents completely different morphology in different zones in the city. If the blue color on this map is the indicator of historical center morphology of residential spaces, all other colors represent the socialist time residential locations. Segment of the city, the population density within St. Petersburg, and it shows that more than 70% of present population, they live in the socialist type residential locations and morphology, which forms a sort of belt around the city center and industrial periphery around the city center. Our previous research proves that retail at different morphological zones developed at different pace after socialism. So our question is, what about the pandemic period? What about last year? Was it different in different morphological zones as well? Now I pass the floor to one of my co-authors, who is Olga Kraskovskaya. Olga, please.
Thank you. So here we would like to represent the field survey map composed by our team. And here you can see the results of the research in 2020 compared with 2016. So here we collected the data of retail facilities of the microrayon areas and divided it into 3 groups by the type of demand: daily, periodic, and episodic ones. So the next, please. Konstantin Axenov. Please.
Okay.
So here you can compare 2 maps by 2016 and 2020. So as you can see from the table, the demand type structure hasn't been significantly changed by 2020. And what we can highlight is that even though the highest number of closed facilities is related to periodic demand, there is no big difference in percentage of the demand of the defined closed facilities by its types of demand. And the total number of vacant places in 2020 is 6%. That allows us to draw the following conclusions. Next, please. So first of all, our field study proved that in the socialist and large housing estate areas, street retail was affected by the pandemic much less dramatically than that in the city center. So here, the proportion of closed facilities was 6.3% in comparison with 14.4% in the city center. Secondly, we haven't registered any significant difference in the share of closed facilities between different demand types in micro-rayons. But among different locations, it varied from 0 to 13%. Also, we haven't managed to find a single factor which could describe this difference. So the only assumption that we can make is so far is that the more street retail was targeted at the local community consumption, the less dramatically it was affected by the pandemic. But this assumption needs to be verified. Thus, we have proved that various functional morphological zones of a metropolis were affected by the pandemic in different ways. So thank you for your attention. Now we will be pleased to answer your questions.
No. Thank you, dear Professor Axenov and your great team to give us the opportunity to go inside the black box of large cities with the impact of from COVID-19, because earlier it was like one entity, one black box of large cities mostly affected by the COVID-19. And you can help with your team to give us inside this black box to understand morphology, major areas more or less impacted by the COVID-19. And we have a question from Ruslan on your presentation about the substitutional growth. In the chat, you can read it, of small warehouse in city centers. Local delivery hubs replacing dropout retail. Is there this phenomenon in St. Petersburg the same or not? Can you answer? It's in the chat.
Sorry, I don't quite, I don't see it right now. Sorry, I cannot see the question, and I cannot.
Well,
maybe I should ask it
in
a more traditional way. Konstantin, thank you for a wonderful presentation, and thank you for your colleagues. My question is about the new trend of the establishment of a new type of so-called substitutes to the old-fashioned retail. When some researchers in States and also, for example, in United Arab Emirates see the trend of the establishment of small warehouses in the centers or in the inhabited parts of the cities that are kind of replacing the retail spaces.
Yes.
Do you see such a trend in St. Petersburg? And maybe this is one of the explanations of the trends in the retail that you observe.
Yeah, see, thank you. Well, actually, this is part of our topic for the next research. We are aimed at the changing structure of retail in the whole after pandemic. And we see at least two different trends. One is very similar to what you described from literature. These are even conversion of some locations into small or not small warehouses in order to serve the logistics of the online services. This is the one trend, and obviously it exists. And it symbolizes the trend for moving the distribution centers closer to local consumption. Another trend is just the opposite. This is the concentration in the hands of huge retailers like Tarek or whatever, X5 retail group. The distribution from probably one or distributed centers all over the city. If supplies from the local warehouses could differ from one area to another, and they provide different type of service or variety of goods for different parts of the city because of that. These huge retailers like X5 try to compete by presenting still the same line of goods, the same variety of goods, and distribution all over the city. So this is the new battle that we can witness now. The localization versus the globalization in the terms of the city, if we can apply this term. And it is very interesting to see what happens, what trend will result in what way. So yes, this is very interesting trend.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aksenov. And there are some similarities with André Torre idea, buy local food, etc. And I would like to stress, dear colleagues, the recent Moscow mayor statement that our strategy after COVID-19 will be with the same priorities than it was before, because it was just the return to the previous events after COVID pandemics will be over. That, as I understood, Professor Aksenov and André Torre too, they have the opposite view, that after these pandemics, it will be impossible to return just to the previous situation, because it will be new reality for the large cities, for the large metropolises of Russia, and not only. That's a big difference between our authorities, who think that it will be just like return to the previous, and our scientists, our experts, who think that it will be new reality, absolutely, maybe not absolutely, but new reality inside the large metropolises. So
I can sign under this.
Yes. And now let's go to the next presenter, Ivan Alov, again, one of the representatives of our new, brave, young generation of regional scholars. The floor.
Hello, dear colleagues. Is everything okay with my screen? I hope. I am excited to be here, and my presentation is rather simple but provocative in a way, and I hope that it will be thought awakening. The topic of my presentation is the connection between residential density and COVID-19 spread in Moscow during the first phase, the first wave. Here you can see various views from different scientists on the problem of density and pandemics connection. So some of them think that residential density limits our opportunities to have social distancing in a proper way. Other stresses out that actually residential density has a large effect on the timing, but not on the deadness of the COVID-19 spread. So the important thing to stress is that not only residential density matters, of course. There are a lot of different types of densities. For example, density inside an apartment, density at the workplace, and of course, some types of situational densities, for example, crowding. also the concept of exposure density, which is quite interesting because it touches the subject of weak ties, I think. Let me start with the case of New York City, which was studied by Citizens Housing Planning Council. It was presented at the end of May. And these maps, you can see that interesting thing is that there is no straight connection between density and COVID-19 cases. We can see that areas with high residential density have low number of COVID-19 cases, and the low number of cases are also associated with a high level of rapid transit system usage. You cannot see this in the pictures, but it was in the report. It's quite interesting because in Moscow, we all have troubles with getting into the underground because it is always seems like it's the most dangerous place. But actually, when we all wear masks and gloves, I think it is not that dangerous comparing to eye-to-eye contact in some cases. There are some critical issues with the data in Russia. Firstly, the quality of the official statistics on COVID-19 is quite unacceptable, I think. It is connected with differences in diagnosing COVID-19 in different regions. Also, during the first phase, which we're looking at right now, there was a low level of testing. And I think that the most important thing is that the topic is very highly politicized. You all know that there are some restriction laws about coronavirus fake news or something. So basically, in most cases, we do not have the opportunity to analyze official data. So what is provocative about this study is that I tried to analyze an unofficial source. Maybe you'll remember during the first week of pandemics, we all scrolled through sites like coronavirus.mesh.ru, where we can saw maps of the coronavirus spread, and everybody was looking for their home address and thought that it is near. Of course, the trust level of the source is very low. I'm not sure if that is lower than official statistics, but I think not much higher. The other thing is that they give data on hospitalization, which is not identical to COVID-19 rate. And of course, there is an ambiguity of using the data, which is based on leaks from Ministry of Health and other official sources. So this is some kind of an experiment. I thought it would be interesting to test this data. And I made this simple map, which shows us that there are some actually spatial logic in the spread of coronavirus and the residential density in different districts of Moscow. There are four types. Red is when we have high residential density and high hospitalization rate. Magenta, and this is the color like this, is low density and high hospitalization rate. Purple, high density and low hospitalization rate. And blue, when two variables are low. Here we can see districts with the highest hospitalization rates to the date of June 1st. Interesting that the leader is Mikhail settlement, very sparsely populated settlement in New Moscow. This is due to there were interesting case of Poselok Armeysky, which has, I think, for about 100 inhabitants, who were all or almost all infected with coronavirus during the first weeks. You see that two of other top 5 districts are settlements too, and another is the Severny district with low density too, and only Beskudnikovsky district has high residential density and high hospitalization rate, which shows us that probably there is no strong connection between residential, at least density, and COVID-19 rate. Districts with the lowest hospitalization rates are all situated in New Moscow, so I show you top 5 inside Moscow Circle Automobile Road. Interesting that 4 of them are situated in this cluster on the southwest part of Moscow, which is famous for its scientific specialization and kind of intellectual population. Well, the champion is Sokol district, which is kind of intelligent in a way too. So based on these data, I tried to create some kind of experimental typology, very simple, but I think rather interesting. Type 1, we can see the most problematic districts, which are industrial or post-industrial areas with high residential density and high situational density. High situational density is related to, for example, low income level. Many people of these areas were going to office or maybe an industrial site where they were working. So probably this is the main reason why the hospitalization rate is higher in these areas. Type 2, for example, Severny, Metrogorodok, and many areas in New Moscow are sparsely populated with high concentration, of high-rise building. This is not the case of New Moscow, but I think that in some settlements there are high-rise buildings too, and high situational density. So, despite low residential density, they have still high hospitalization rate. Type 3 is a large area in the center, the west, and the southwest of Moscow, which are more prosperous, more intellectual, labor-based districts. So people there have more chances, better chances to self-isolate themselves, to work at distance, maybe in their apartments or at the dachas. And type 4 is quite interesting one. You can see at the eastern part of Moscow, there are some areas with high residential density and low hospitalization rate. These districts are characterized with concentrations of, in Sobyanin, Moscow, low and middle rise buildings. For example, Khrushchevkas with 5 levels, or I don't know, Panelkas with 9 to maybe 11, 14 levels, which in the new reality of Moscow is not very high. And there are a lot of green zones, parks, squares, and other things. So people have an opportunity to walk, to have their leisure on a distance between each other. So it is interesting that we can see the most prosperous and probably the least prosperous, at least in the old Moscow limits, city limits. They have quite their look alike in this sense. The hospitalization rate is low. And the end of my presentation, I would like to share my personal experience. I was riding a bicycle in the time of quite a problematic stage of pandemic in June in the district of Leonozo, which was one of the most problematic in hospitalization rate sense. You can see that people are standing in the line with no social distance, no masks, and about 2/3 of the people in the line are elderly. So I think that, of course, situational density is the thing that makes difference, not residential density. So I think that that's all, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ivan. You are the first to touch this theme of ethic of research on COVID-19. That's one of the interesting issue you have covered in your presentation, and of course the issue of density also, because density it's of course very powerful tool to deal with pandemic's expansion, but not only, and institutional factors, the desire of people to obey and to follow institutional rules and regimes also does matter. It's like Nadezhda said in her plenary presentation, space or flows or space of places. And it looks like our last two presentations have covered the issue of space of places, of urban places, the interior environment. Okay, and we are going to the next presentation of international team about the food security and food consumption in Russia. Please take the screen or the floor.
Thank you. My name is Tarek bin Hassen. I'm assistant professor of policy planning and development from Qatar University. So today I'm going to present the first results actually of our research about food consumption in Russia. Yes, so the title of the presentation is about the impact of COVID-19 on food behavior and food consumption in Russia. So COVID-19 affected the agro-food system from producer to processors and consumers at different level. But from our study, we can see some worldwide trends that have emerged. Firstly, panic buying and stockpiling of non-perishable food product like flour, pasta, canned food. It's mostly because people are scary, so it's to mitigate the risk of future shortage. Secondly, consumers have largely shifted from out of home to at-home consumption and rediscovered home cooking, and they are trying a new recipe all around the world. Of course, because coffee and the restaurant were closed because of COVID-19. Also, COVID-19 changed how people are eating and the quality of their diet. So we have actually two tendencies. On one hand, the psychological reaction to COVID-19 disturbed diet and lead to unhealthy eating patterns with frequent snacking and emotional eating, especially of comfort food like sweet cake. On the other hand, some consumers start to take their diet seriously, and they start to have a healthy diet. It's because they are scared about COVID-19 and they're trying to boost their immunity system. Fourth, COVID-19 also changed where and how consumers buy their food. So, for example, in many countries around the world, consumers reduced the number of shopping trips and were shopping less than usual, buying more on each trip to reduce the store visit and to reduce their the risk to have COVID-19 when they are buying their food. 5, consumers shifted to online shopping. So we saw in many countries around the world an increase in online shopping. So in Russia, the government took strong containment measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19 with restriction on daily living, like social distancing, the closing of business and schools. Of course, this action were essential to stop the virus, but we can say that this action have some potential impact on diet and food behavior. So that's the goal of our presentation today, is to present the result of this research, to investigate the immediate impacts of COVID-19 on Russian consumer awareness, attitude, and behavior related to food consumption and food shopping. So for the methodology, this paper or this presentation, it's a part of an international research project. So we study the impact of COVID-19 on food consumption and food behavior in many countries around the world, like Qatar, like Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, and several countries in the Balkan, and also Russia. So for Russia, it was based on an online survey using a structured questionnaire. So we administrated the questionnaire from October 7 until actually last week. We're still in the first steps to analyze the results. And we used SurveyMonkey. So the questionnaire that we used consisted of 24 questions. So we have different type of question, one option, multiple choice, and open question. And we have actually 3 sections. So the first section, it's about general information about the respondent, 10 questions. The second part, it's about food purchase and consumption behavior, 15 questions. And the third part, it's about emotion related to COVID-19. So we have 2 parts, negative emotion like sadness, depression, and we have positive emotions. So for Russia, we got 1,297 answers. And the data will be analyzed with later with SPSS version 25. So here, the first actually results. So almost 65% of the respondents were women. 60% were aged from 18 to 24 old. 37% were highly educated. 52% earned the same as most other households in Russia. 43% were active professionally. 20% were married with children, and 18.43% lost their job or had pay reduction in their salary due to COVID-19. So here's some results about the shopping behavior during COVID-19. Firstly, we noticed that we have some change on how Russian consumer shop and buy their food. So for example, here we can see that almost 25% of the participants went shopping less than usual. And at the same time, it's all like 15% they buy more than usual in each trip to the grocery store. So also 20% of the respondents drank more water. Here we're gonna see the results regarding diet, how consumer in Russia changed their behavior regarding food consumption. So 20% drank more water, 32% consumed less unhealthy food like fast food, 21% consume less unhealthy snacks. Also 22% consumed less sweets, cookies, cakes, and candies. And 90% cooked and prepared food more. Also, 41% ate out less. So of course, because the restaurant and cafeteria and fast food are closed. Also here we have some results regarding panic buying and stocking up food. So almost 30% of our cohort stocked up food during because of the COVID-19. And the most item that the respondent, of course, stocked up is cereal and cereal product. So we have also some sugar, some like 20% they stock up sugar, the same percentage for meat, but mostly it's about the cereals and the cereals product like pasta, all the cereal product. Also, we can say that stocking up food and the panic buying was more related to concern about food prices rising. So here we have a question about how concerned you have been since COVID-19 became serious in Russia about the following food related. And of course, we can see that food price raising was one of the most important concern for Russian consumers. Also, we have some results regarding food waste. So we can see that the food we have, Russian consumers wasted less food during COVID-19. Okay, the results actually, as a conclusion, we can say that this result indicated a shift toward a healthier diet during the COVID-19 pandemic. We can consider it as a positive change toward a healthy diet compared to the pre-COVID-19 situation. Secondly, the pandemic transformed how consumers in Russia get their food. So consumers reduced the number of shopping trips and were shopping less than usual, buying more on each trip to reduce the store visit and accordingly controlling their perceived risk of exposure to the virus.
Thank you for your presentation. As we all understood, eat more healthy food in the time of COVID-19. That's like...
Actually, I have 2 more slides, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yes, please continue.
Yeah.
Well, may I ask a question?
Yeah, I have just 2 more slides and I can get your question.
Sorry.
Yes. So actually, at the same time, we didn't notice because we did the same research here in Qatar, and what we saw in Qatar that there's an increase, a big increase in the online shopping, but we didn't notice the same thing in behavior in Russia. Maybe because people prefer to buy their food in person because they prefer to check the quality and freshness of food. But I think overall in Russia, the online shopping is not very developed yet. Actually, also the results indicate a surge in stockpiling, as we saw, panic buying, mostly of non-perishable food. like a cereal product, and especially what we call buckwheat, and I think you called in Russia the greshka. So, and more recently, I saw some in the news that people start again to stock and stockpile food because of the second. Maybe there's a potential second lockdown because of the second wave of COVID-19. And we saw actually that COVID-19 unleashed culinary capability. So people start to cook more often at their home. Decrease of food waste, but we can say that also the decrease of food waste is more related to socio-economic context. People are scared to lose because of the loss of incomes. So it's more because of the loss of income. So people are more, they make more attention to food waste than by pro-environmental concern. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We have time for questions. And so please use this opportunity. I ask the audience to pose your questions on the food behavior in Russia during COVID-19 pandemic. Take the floor, dear colleagues, with questions.
Okay, may I ask it? One.
Yes, yes, easily.
Your respondents were basically young.
Yes.
So these results can be regarded as the young strata related.
Yes.
And what about, say, binge eating, which was a famous, very well known in Russia, an effect of the virus pandemic, when elder people began to eat more and consume more food than before the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Actually, the results, because of our sample, 60% of maybe because the young person are more used to answer the question in the survey. They are more familiar with the online survey. But I think what we're gonna do for the analyze later, we're gonna separate our sample in two parts. We're gonna take just the young people from 18 to 24 to have a separate results for them, and to have a second step for, or second, results for the other part of the sample.
Any questions? Okay, do you have? No? Okay. Well, let's, before next presenter, I have one suggestion for André Torre. That's my personal suggestion, to add Albert Camus' La Peste subject in next COVID-19 presentation, because it's the exact novel to mention with this case of contemporary pandemics. It was in 1945 written, and it's just to the topic, just. So we have Mikhail Topnikov as the last presenter before lunch. And again, I am very satisfied that it's new, young, brave generation of Russian regional scholars, economic geographers, with their viewpoint on COVID-19. Please take the floor.
Wait a second. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. We have a small presentation on commercial property market shocks in Russia, which we made with my group mate and colleague Andrey Torre. And surprisingly to me, it has a lot of in common with Konstantin's presentation, so I think it would be nice to compare results and maybe check the clocks together. So, what was the outline of this commercial property market shocks? First of all, there was a nationwide lockdown, which was introduced basically introduced and then prolonged on March 30, and this lockdown led to a huge drop in people mobility and activity, which was also mentioned in the prior presentations. Therefore, there was a huge lack of demand for services, and because most of services are not suitable for using online for now in Russia, and this creates a huge lack of demand, and therefore businesses don't have enough funds to pay rent, pay taxation, pay for jobs, and etc. So the most common decision for these businesses was to abort the rent agreements, and then this results into the increase in property supply. Even some of enthusiasts created a map which shows the businesses in distress in Russia and some neighboring countries, where you can just put a point on a map and then type whatever your company is, whatever circumstances do you have, whatever problems you have related to COVID, and and also this database is checked. So this is kind of a huge numbers of businesses which faced a lot of problems, and most of them were connected with lack of funds. So how did we explore it? The commercial property crisis is the data of Cyan. It's a major property advertiser aggregator in Russia, and also has a huge database. We were, with my colleague, mining the data from April the 3rd onwards to mid-June. And so this data contains such things as location data, which is represented here in this small map, some price-related things such as total rental price for the object and the object category. Unfortunately, this data set didn't have any, because of it's an open API of Cyan, it didn't have information on area of the objects and the weighted price per square meter, so it made a little bit tricky to deal with prices, but we actually find a kind of way to do it. So this was the mining part, and we were mining data for 14 regional centers in Russia, 8 with population over 1 million, and 6 of smaller regional centers. Unfortunately, we did not mine data for St. Petersburg, but we should have done it probably. In most of cities, there was a significant, huge number of rental ads in the database, but for some cities it was not enough to explore the data on city scale. Blagoveshchensk and Vladivostok. So the Cyan database is not really highly developed here, so probably it is replaced by some other sources like Avito and Yandex Realty. So how did the shockwave look like? It looked like this. This is an example of distributions of dates created in Moscow from the dataset slice and mined on July 1st. And it has distinguished 3 parts. The first part is an old normality part, which is kind of a low amplitude waves of weekly dynamics, which have a decline on weekdays and local peaks at the beginning of each week, and the amplitude is not that huge. Then we have a shock wave. It's a huge number of posted new ads, and the market is, from this date onwards, is now flooded with supply actually. And then we have an aftershock phase, we can't really call it a new normality of some kind because the market is not yet stable. But we can say that this aftershock phase has relatively high amplitudes and some shifted peaks actually. So basically on the stage of old normality, we had peaks mostly on Monday. Here we have like on random time, for example, this peak is some kind of maybe Wednesday or Thursday. I don't get it. Yeah, it's probably Wednesday. So because everyone is sitting like at home and has nothing like yet to do except for working. So I think we all working like all week long, 24/7. Yeah. So basically the same applies to other cities. This is an example for Nizhny Novgorod. All of a sudden, same phases, but a lot less events here in this data set, and maybe not that represented. Also, I would like to point out these small peaks before the end of each month. They correspond to like the end of a rental month. So they are connected with kind of waves of prolongations of the contract. So basically, they all are their period of action is like counted in odd number, is in like monthly. I don't know how to say it, but that's okay, I guess. But it was not the case for Far East side. Far East, here we have a different style of such a graph. Here is an example of Khabarovsk, and here we have a huge peak, the same huge peak, but almost like 1.5 months earlier than in Central Russia with these two previous cities. So this may be like a consequence of early border restrictions with China and maybe some drop in products businesses sell or whatever. As for city scale, basically it's the same same things which Konstantin said. I should explain first what the colors correspond for. The red corresponds for higher number of ads. The more bluish one is for lower number of ads. And so if we compare April 3rd and March 16th, there is a huge number of ads appear in the city center, and not that much, but they do appear in the periphery. And here we have some kind of a imbalance between city periphery and city center, because city center is more developed in terms of tertiary sector of economics. However, if we look at how does the beginning of June looks like, I'll like switch a bit these pictures. Nothing much has changed since April 16. Still the center is loaded with supply. Still the geography, geography is basically the same. Same applies actually for other cities. This is an example of Kazan. Here we have also the huge increase in supply in the city center. But there is a certain differentiation between cities. This graph represents the increase rate at the beginning of months from April to July compared to the beginning of April. So it's April 3rd, and then May 3rd, June 3rd, and July 3rd. So I said that it was a mistake that I said that we were mining data to mid-June. It's actually mid-July. So basically, here we can see that most of the major cities, like from Central Russia, right, like Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, some Euro ones like Ufa and also Kazan have dropped a lot of events into the data set, and the increase rate is pretty high. It's not the case for our other over 1 million people populated cities like Novosibirsk and Omsk. It's mainly because the COVID-19 wave hit them like a little bit farther in time. So, and some cities are not really reacted that much. For Vladivostok and Chita relatively stayed at the same level, but it's kind of maybe misleading because of lack of database and data points there. So the price volatility case is also interesting, I guess, because here we have a Moscow case, and one main trend we have here is that western parts of Moscow are more volatile during this crisis than the eastern parts, except for one huge outlier in Danilovsky district. This outlier appears because there is a huge work on conversion the old automobile plant to residential complexes and trading centers. So I'll show the graph afterwards. It will explain it a little bit more, and also two outliers here and here is Yasinov and Kurkina. They're just a low base effects, not that much businesses out there. So in terms of volatility, here's a bit further explanation of Danilovsky phenomenon. It has like two huge peaks of differentiation of different to normality prices. This one is clearly the one which was which was led by the lockdown. This one is probably introducing some new properties and residential complexes which were open. So what are the key findings we have? So the first one is that despite this lockdown, consequences were not that severe in remote parts of Russia. So for example, Siberia, as COVID probably hasn't reached the cities at these months. The case of Khabarovsk was pretty interesting. It has an early peak, and city centers actually dropped significantly lower than peripheries, and also it applies for the more developed cities. So basically, the more central you are, the harder the heat of the wave was. And same applies actually for property prices, except for major outliers like Danilovsky. And what we're going to do with Andrey in the future, so maybe we should improve our dataset structure. It appeared that we need to combine these slices into one huge database where we have two timestamps which corresponds for when the ad appeared in a database and when it disappeared. Maybe some applications of exploratory spatial data analysis, maybe some local statistics, etc. We should probably review and improve the price analysis because it was not that easy to do. So we basically counted the price index for portfolio of locations in each of the major districts in Moscow, so which were like represented in the database on April 3rd, and then onwards they were like stable there. And we should probably explore the differentiation by object categories. That's a lot of them. There are some special stuff. So that's it, I guess. I'll be happy to answer your questions, and maybe some improvements proposals are also welcome. Thank you.
Well, Thank you, Mikhail. Of course, very impressive because it's interesting to see how the commercial property market behavior can reveal differences inside the Russian Federation, like from the Far East to the western part of Russia. And it's interesting to see that these peaks were so different in the commercial property market. So that's really interesting and impressive. And of course, the issue about center periphery and the topic has already covered by Konstantin, the different reaction of the core, of the urban core and its periphery. And there is several questions from our colleagues at the chat.
Okay, I'll read it. Wait a sec.
Yes, and please answer these questions.
From Ivan Alov. On the map of supply chain in Moscow, it can be seen that there is some kind of star-shaped structure. Does it correlate with the flow of traffic activity or maybe some other factors? Well, I don't actually know. So maybe it should be dependent actually, because the activity hasn't dropped down like equally in different parts of huge city. It should not be like this. And from Ruslan Dokhov, have you noted any unusual stable islands from? What is a stable island? I don't actually get it. Ruslan, could you please answer that? Like,
sorry, they are stable islands, like any stable parts that were not so much affected by the coronavirus-led crisis.
Yeah, it hasn't been explored yet, but it certainly will be. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question,
So
yes?
maybe one more. Andrey Lich wanted to ask something. I don't know.
No.
Okay.
I told that stable is stable.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any more questions to Mikhail from the audience?
Можно мне, Михаил, спасибо большое. Действительно, это очень близко тому, что мы делаем. Вопрос, я так понимаю, что в вашей базе не фиксировались более дробные бизнес-показатели, например, по отрасли, которая может быть размещена в этой точке, или предыдущее использование этой точки.
So you mean so the question was should I translate it or should you?
I will repeat in English. Sorry about that. The question is whether you applied other indicators like the branch of industry for every location, and could you conceptualize this point after that?
Well, there are some categories of commercial properties in the database, but they so the most distinguished thing we could extract from the database using this category was to like extract shops, grocery shops, etc., and to extract maybe some special things like offices and etc. But if we would like to convert these categories into like some economically feasible things, we will probably can't do that for most of these categories. So these are like mostly the mostly economic, not that really economically related ones. For example, free appointment object rent or warehouse rent, office rent, shopping area rent. it's not that easy to convert into economical, like that it should make sense in economical term, but I'm not seeing it like an easy task to do. So we could probably think of it more, a little bit more. Yeah. So that's it.
Yes, thank you, Mikhail, for the profound answer to the Konstantin question. Any questions to Mikhail? Or if not, you can pose questions to the previous panelists and previous reports. As far as I know, Ruslan has posed a question to Andrey on the Dacha, yes? I can...
I answered personally to Ruslan.
Okay, yes, nice. Any new questions? Or if not, no. In this case, well, let's rest. We have lunch break now till 1:30, and we'll all be happy to meet again each other after this lunch break at 1:30, please. And now have a rest after this brainstorm of our first plenary and session meeting. See you in 35 minutes. Yes, and the conference and the Zoom will be walk-in, so you can go and do whatever you want, but Zoom will be functioning and all the conference will be going. So in 35 minutes, we'll start again.